Yay! There we go. Okay. Well, this is a story about a trip I took with my father starting in 1988. And it's a story about B-24s. Obviously, that's what this whole group is here about. You'll notice that 3,000 of those airplanes, and by the way, the B-24 was the most produced bomber of all combatants of all time, over 18,000 of them. 3,000 of them were produced right here in our Fort Worth area, and the other 1,000 were produced down here in the Grand Prairie area of Dallas. But that's just skin and bones and blood and guts. What the story's about is about people. People in all different aspects that affected this story. Most are familiar with Rosie the Riveter. She kind of becomes an icon of the worker during World War II. But in fact, males, elderly males, men who did not have physical capability to get into the armed services were all recruited and worked 24/7 to produce all kinds of armaments. At the height of it, one B-24 rolled off the production line every hour during World War II, a feat that we could not duplicate today. The airplane is metal and composites and various pieces, but it's personified and becomes a person through the air crews and the maintenance people. If you look at all combatants in World War II, you'll find every one of them used some form of nose art. But only we Americans could take it to the extremes. So you see cartoon characters up here, you see various women up here, girlfriends, or the girlfriend you wish you had, or the woman you're going to go back and find in the States when it's all over and done with. So the art became pervasive. In fact, sometimes it became garishly extremely exaggerated. This is dragging its tail. It was one of the most artful airplanes of the war. Unfortunately, it was turned into the smelter after the war and was never kept. It's about the people, the men who flew this airplane in extremely difficult conditions of temperatures, lack of oxygen. It's about the maintenance people who worked 24/7 with these airplanes to get them in the air in very difficult conditions, physical conditions in the theater. And it's about people. On the left, you see Alfred C. Folck, First Lieutenant, U.S. Army Air Force. He was my father's best friend. On the right, you see Alfred P. Metz. That's me. I was born about 2 years after Alfred Folck was killed. I was named in honor of Alfred Folck. But I was never called Alfred. I go by Paul, and it never occurred to me as a young boy why that was. But I think looking back on it, it's because it was only 2 years after Alfred had died, and it was probably too painful for Mom and Dad to say, Alfred, get out of the mud. Alfred, come in, it's time for your bath. Alfred, Alfred, Alfred was not something they wanted to hear, so I became Paul, and I never thought twice about it. Until I was about 41 years old. And one day I asked myself, who am I, or who was I named after, and what was this person? So I asked my father to help me go on a search of Alfred Folck. And I wanted to understand who he was. And Dad gave me these following facts. He said Alfred Folck flew B-26s. They were rammed by a German fighter. Everybody on board was killed. And then he had this single picture of Alfred. You see Alfred there? My dad was 6'4". Alfred was about 5'7" or 8. And so Mutt and Jeff kind of guy, but they were fast friends. They double dated. They played baseball together. Tremendous bond between them. So when he was lost, that was a terrible tragedy. So this is what we knew to start my search for Alfred Folck. When I got all done and what I'm going to present to you today, the only thing that was true about that story that my father had was the picture. I was amazed at how much information I could gather on this one small incident in a long war. But today I can tell you the serial number of all the engines on his airplane. I can tell you the machine gun serial numbers of all the machine guns on his airplane, and a lot more. So my objective was I wanted to discover the details of Alfred Folck and who he was, and I wanted to build a model of his airplane because that happens to be a hobby of mine. So that's what Dad and I set out to do. Now, word of caution here. I'm going to put up a bunch of pages of things. You can't read them. I don't expect you to read them. I will tell you what you need to know about these various things I'm going to show you. What I wanted to emphasize was that what I say today is based on actual facts that we uncovered in the search for Katy. We knew nothing more than that picture I just showed you. And so Dad got a hold of Alfred Folck's sister, who still lived in Springfield, Ohio, where we lived, and asked her if she had anything at all of Alfred's that would help us in the search. And she came up with this document on the left-hand side, which says, individual flight record, student. Well, obviously it wasn't a student, it was a combat crew. You can almost imagine in the hustle and bustle they were in, coming out of Benghazi and Africa. Forms and things may not be perfect, but we got something close enough. This student form will work. This happens to be the form that was filled out on the day or the month he died. So it lists the month of February 1944 and the missions. And the last mission is missing in action. Okay? But more importantly, it tells us up the top what the associations was. 513th Bomb Squadron, 376th Bomb Group, 47th Bomb Wing, 15th Air Force. So I knew I had a little bit of a lead to go on. The Air Force Museum was just about 20 minutes away from our house. In those days, you could go down and roam the libraries and dig through and at your leisure. So Dad and I headed down to the Air Force Museum and spent some time, and we came across this book, which many of you may be familiar with. It's called The Intelligencer. It's kind of a historical document or book that's put out by the 376 Bomb Group. We didn't find anything in particular about Alfred Folck, but we did find some additional leads in here to the story. The next piece of the story is absolutely pure serendipity, which you're going to hear several examples of the fate and chances that occur in this story. My dad was a ham radio operator, amateur ham radio operator, and he would get on the radio and just talk to people that he came upon. One Saturday night, he came upon this Armed Forces Flyers Den and began talking to the guy by the name of Bill. And Bill asked Dad, what are you doing? And they chit-chatted back and forth about the weather and so forth. And Dad had mentioned that he and his son, me, were searching for a man who was flying bombers in World War II. And Bill turned out to be Bill Pointer. And Bill said that night on the radio, he said, that's a real coincidence. I happen to be the historian of the 376 Bomb Group. And he said, I have contacts of all the air crew and the maintenance people who are still alive. And he said, let me do a search and see if anybody knows this man, Alfred Folck. He said, I'll get back to you. He said, in the meantime, why don't you contact Maxwell Air Force Base and go to their archives group and see what they can tell you about Alfred Folck. Because now we knew when he disappeared, the 22nd of February, and we knew all of his associated organizational structure. So we did. We wrote to Maxwell and had them search for us. In the meantime, Bill Pointer went searching through the 376 Bomb Group. Now, this was 1988 BC, before computers. Okay. So most everything was done by mail, by snail mail. And Bill Pointer would send out these letters of inquiry, and whenever he did, he would send us back a copy in an envelope, and this is the back of one of the envelopes. And you can see what he did. He put the names of the various aircraft that they knew of in the 376 Bomb Group back, and then the 4 squadrons of the 376 Bomb Group. Well, I was a historian, a little bit of a historian. I got curious. I said, boy, if Alfred Folck's airplane is here, he's in good company. You've got Teggy Ann, K.K. Compton's airplane that was used in the Romanian Ploiesti raids. Well-known airplane. You've got Lady Be Good. Anybody know about Lady Be Good?
Yeah.
Discovered in the Libyan desert in, I think, 1972. How was it?
57.
67?
57.
57. Okay. Found almost intact in the living desert. Crew did not survive. Blue Streak went on a well-publicized tour, a bond tour in the U.S. It's one of the most photographed of the B-24s. And finally, Strawberry Bitch is the only remaining B-24D that's in the Air Force Museum to this day. So that's what we had to start with. Again, you can't read these. These are pages out of a missing air crew report. Every airplane that went down, in fact, every person that fell out of an airplane, a missing air crew report was put into the files. And this comes from the Alfred Folck file on the loss of his airplane. It's a hand-written crew drawing of the target area, which turned out to be Regensburg on the 22nd of February, a period known as Big Week. For every person in the airplane, there was a form filled out. And the forms, this one has before Alfred Folck, it said, when did you last hear from him? An interphone conversation. Well, that had to be from somebody in the crew that heard that, but we thought everybody was dead. And did he have his parachute on? No. And for those of you here that flew B-24s, it's a pretty cramped cockpit. I understand that they would hook the chute, the pilot and co-pilot back here on the bulkhead, and they'd have to get it on, strap on. But he did not have a chute on. And then down at the bottom, it gives a list of the air missions that it had leading up to the fatal mission over Regensburg. This is one of the most important and powerful witness reports of what happened that day. This is by a guy named Staff Sergeant John Maciejewicz. And he notes that they had come over the target area, could not see the target, began a 360-degree turn to re-attack, were attacked by Messerschmitt 410s and 109s, and fought their way out over the target, released their load, and turned left towards Italy. In the process, two of the aircraft collided. He watched an airplane that he calls KO Katy 2. Right out his waist gun window, he sees them collide with another B-24 in the formation. They all go down in flames. Sergeant Maciejewicz says he sees two men fall out. They don't have parachutes on. He sees a third man come out, and his parachute opens right away. And then he says, I'm drawn back into my waist gun position because we're under attack. So he gives us this information, but I want you to remember the name John Maciejewicz. This is the complete loss report that gives us most of the details that we have. This is where we come up with the serial numbers for engines and guns. The thing that's important about this is that think about the midst of World War II with airplanes, thousands of airplanes being lost constantly, and yet somebody took the time to document to an extreme level of detail this information, which still survives through this day. There are three entries on here that are of interest. You see on the right side, two of them say POW. And in fact, two men survived the incident. I'll tell you about both of those men. So, there she was. We now know she's KO Katy, and we know that she was with some distinguished company at the time. This is KO Katy. You see it there. That is not Alfred Folck. That is not his crew. But this is the airplane he went down in. This is Isaac Ashburn's crew. On 22nd of February, they were sent to the Isle of Capri for R&R, rest and relaxation, get away from the combat area, get your mind off of combat. Alfred Folck's crew did not have a regular airplane, so they got whatever was available. It just so happened that on that day, KO Katy was available, and Alfred Folck and crew were assigned to this airplane. So everybody in this picture went off to the Isle of Capri, except for one man. That man stayed behind because he wanted to get another counter so he could get back to the States earlier. That man was Staff Sergeant John Maciejewicz.